Well, Matt, Liam Lawson is out. Did you know before any of us?
So, because I wasn't at the race, I didn't see the story evolving, and from a strategy point of view, didn't, know in that moment. But talking to people within the team, suddenly became quite clear that the job was under threat, and it seemed like it was a 50-50 moment. Would he stay? Would he go? Whether he would go for good, whether he might make it to Japan. Now, then there was a meeting of the head honchos, I believe, in Dubai. This is not uncommon. After a race, they'll meet to talk about the big issues. Obviously, Lawson was the big issue. And so there's some evolving story. Now, when I spoke to Red Bull at the start of the week, Liam Lawson was going to stay as the driver. That was the understanding at that point. But then on Wednesday afternoon, they told me that actually Liam Lawson was being removed from the team, Yuki Tsunoda coming in, and they were swapping race seats.
So ultimately, who makes that decision? Is it Christian Horner?
Well, he's the team principal, and another key decision maker is Helmut Marko. Now, he's called motorsport consultant, which sounds a very vague title, but he's a very influential member of the team. What I don't know yet is who else was involved in that meeting. Now, did that go to higher Red Bull hierarchy? By that, I mean back in Austria, the bosses, whether they get involved in something like that. What's fun is, it sounds fun, sounds a wrong word, but to try and dissect the fallout for this, to find out what happens. And what's great is, I haven't had the chance to do that, but I'll be able to go into the team and find out a bit more of how that the whole situation played out from the end of that race to the point where they made the decision on Thursday, announced the decision on Thursday that Lawson was for the chop.
Hello, welcome to the Inside Track, the new Formula One podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the biggest stories in the sport with exclusive access to Red Bull Racing. And it's quite a good time to have exclusive access to Red Bull Racing. I'm broadcaster and Formula One fan Rick Edwards.
And I'm sports journalist Matt Magendie. Now, each week we're going to go behind the scenes to find out the latest gossip, find out who's thriving, who's under pressure, and we might find someone closer to home is under pressure.
I think we might. This season we're getting up close and personal with Red Bull as they battle to retain their standing as the fastest team on the planet. So if we look at Red Bull first, Max Verstappen finishes fourth. It's okay. Probably not that disappointed. Liam Lawson has lost his seat to Yuki Tsunoda after two races. I can believe it and I can't believe it. Like it's so drastic, and feels so harsh. But maybe that is just what you need to be incredibly successful. Yeah,
I mean, it does seem a hard call on a driver that they put their faith in, that they decided was the best choice last season for this season to replace Checo Perez, and now they decided not.
Spent quite a lot of money to get rid of Perez as well.
I think they were going to get rid of Perez anyway. I think that he served his time for the team. That was the end of that relationship. Yeah. So they were definitely going to bring someone in.
Although that is also quite a bad decision because they gave him a long contract, or longish contract, and quite soon after we're like, no, I shouldn't have done that. Have some money, off you go.
Yeah, I know. There'll be a lot of sort of soul searching, head scratching, and sort of internal talk of what went wrong and the decisions were made. But when they decided to get rid of him, it seemed fairly like a straight fight between two drivers, between Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda. And I think the perception at the time was Lawson was this, elbows out, hard racer. He's going to take on everyone.
Good mentality was the thing, wasn't it? Yeah.
Work hard, lots of simulation work. And they felt he had the mental fortitude to deal with Max Verstappen. Now, that's the hardest job in Formula One, to be a teammate of Max Verstappen, because he is just so formidable. And you've seen really great drivers thrive at other teams post Red Bull because they've had this barometer trying to drive this car and trying to drive against Verstappen. You see Albon shining now, for example, at Williams. Yeah. He's going great guns. But they felt Lawson was the choice over Tsunoda. With Tsunoda, I think they thought maybe he didn't have that mental strength to take on Verstappen. I don't know if you've listened to when he on the race radio. Some of his race radio stuff were amazing back in the day. Pretty crazy, shouty, sweary guy.
Good fun, but
yes, But I think when they made that call, perhaps that was a wake-up call to Tsunoda, who seems to have maybe buckled up his act, matured.
Just a bit older as well, isn't
a bit older. And they were very impressed with him, from what I understand talking to members of the team. They were very impressed with how he went in testing in Bahrain. I think at the end of season, last season, there was a Middle East test as well. Bahrain at the start of this season and the opening two races, China didn't end up where he wanted to be, but they've been impressed by that and decided that this is the right call. which seems remarkable because it's only a few weeks, months down from when they made the last call. But they believe that Tsunoda is the right one for them. Whether that proves to be the reality is another matter. And how he then stacks up against a Verstappen, will it be another driver falling by the wayside?
Yeah, how long do they give him? I mean, you can't give him 2 races. You've got to give him a good run.
I think there'll be the belief that they'll be thinking this is the driver for the rest of the season for them. You know, they can't be changing that again.
They were thinking that about Liam Lawson, obviously.
You know, Lawson, I think there were sort of excuses made for him in Australia. There was a bit of misfortune. He had a tough test in Bahrain and stuff. But the fact that he qualified at the very back of the grid for both the sprint race and the main race in a Red Bull, like it might not. You know, we're talking it might be a hard car to handle, but that's not the 10th fastest car on the grid.
At worst, it's the 4th fastest car on the grid.
Yeah, let's say
probably.
That's probably the reality right now. Probably is the 4th fastest, 3rd, 4th, something like that.
Yeah.
In that ballpark. So that driver should not be in 20th position.
No.
And obviously he made it up to 12th, which you mentioned, but he only made it there because he managed to get past a couple of the kick Saubers, but there were race retirements, and on top of that, there were people disqualified after the race. So the 12th on paper looks a bit better than it was, really.
But it's still no points.
No, still no points.
It's points that they need. You just need someone regularly picking up some points if they're going to have a chance in the Constructors.
And what would be interesting is how Red Bull work, because obviously they've got the sister team as well, which Lawson will go into. It's a direct swap with Tsunoda. You know, how do you build up that driver? You know, I would think that would be a real dent to your confidence that may already be low. Do you put an arm around him? What do you do?
It massively motivates you, I suppose. That's the possibility.
Yeah.
You're like, I will prove you people wrong.
Yeah,
I'm going to fly.
Well, a lot of drivers have done that when that's happened.
Yeah.
So
it might be the making of him. You sort of
maybe.
Hope
It's such a crazy merry-go-round Formula One that the next thing he could be the greatest thing since sliced bread when it comes round in a couple of years' time, and he'll be fronting out a team you don't know. But there's still the belief that he is quick. It was quite a punchy interview. I don't know if you heard it after the race when it was put to Lawson. Well, what about Yuki Tsunoda replacing you? And he's like, well, wait a second. I drove against him in junior formula. I beat him all the time. No issue.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, that's not been the case because he's been replaced, but I quite liked that talk and that attitude. So maybe what you're saying that he's going to be all feisty and go for it.
Also, we spoke about this last week and it had been discussed prior to that as well. One of the hopes with Liam Lawson was that he liked a similar car setup, the pointy car setup that Verstappen favours or certainly can control. And I don't know if that's the case with Tsunoda, but he's going to have to get his head around it pretty quickly.
In China, when you watched Verstappen, the in-cockpit driving of the car as opposed to Lawson, Verstappen, you'd see him turn in and he'd keep his position. It was as though he was driving, that he had faith in that car. When you watch Lawson, his hands are all over the place. You know, there is no belief, I assume, in the car. I mean, I imagine he has belief in himself. You could see the lack of confidence.
Constantly tries to sort of steady it, really.
Correcting it in those corners.
Yeah,
and every time you're doing that, you're losing time, you're losing pace. I think he was 9/10 of a lap, 9/10 of a second slower per lap than Verstappen, which is not really excusable. That is too big. Bearing in mind how tight, in the old days of Formula One, that was not that big a margin. If you're talking across the grid, that is too big a margin.
You spoke to him in Australia a couple of weekends ago. This was before the race, before all that we know now. But I do think it's interesting to sort of get a bit of insight into what was going on in his head. And some of it is quite relevant, isn't it? So you ask him about whether he's expecting more attention and more pressure being a Red Bull driver.
Right now, I'm more excited than anything. I'm probably more excited for a season, for a race than ever. I think the last couple of years, I guess coming in, we're always being evaluated. We're always, I guess, in that sort of position. You're never really guaranteed a future in the sport, and it's always performance-based. But I think with the way I was brought in the last couple of years, finishing a season or coming in for a few races as reserve, there were very short stints, very important races to do, whereas now having a pre-season and preparation, knowing that I've got, I guess, the season ahead of me to work on things.
Sort of heartbreaking, actually, listening to that, because he's really excited. He's like, I've got the season ahead of me to work on everything. You haven't, actually, it turns out. Something small there that I picked up on is him saying, we're constantly analysed. And that is true. And so the biggest question I have is, given all of the analysis that they will have done of their options for that second seat, has everything changed so drastically, or how has everything changed so drastically in the space of 2 races?
Well, he just had 2 really bad weekends. I mean, terrible weekends, didn't he? I mean,
But yeah,
ended up in the barriers.
Undeniably bad weekends.
So I think he performed much worse than they anticipated. And I don't think they wanted to have another Perez situation where they kept on giving a chance. Now, after 2 races, it feels particularly harsh because Lawson, he talks in that clip how he has experience of driving part seasons, so he knows some of the circuits, but he's never driven Australia or China.
Tell you where he has driven, Suzuka.
Exactly. Yeah. So, maybe you should have given him a chance. It would have been kinder to give him a chance there. I don't know. It would be interesting to know how he might have fared at a track he was more familiar with. I mean, they've got so much information at a Formula One team. They'll have all the numbers of every single lap, of every single corner. They'll be able to compare how he's performing in each corner. They can see Tsunoda, etc.
And versus Max as well.
Yeah, of course. And so they will have the numbers there, and they were of the belief, as brutal as it seems to you or I, and probably everyone else listening, that was the right call for them.
Everything I've ever heard from Christian Horner, and whenever I've spoken to him, he's confident and Red Bullish.
Yeah.
And I think he'll probably be quite frank about how they've arrived at that decision.
I think you'll get the first take on it in probably Thursday, I guess, in Japan, that he'll be doing a lot of interviews, and you'll get the sense. But he'll be, this is the decision we made, and he's always pretty firm and backs his decisions and believes them. It feels like a rapid decision, but he won't have rushed this. They will have thought and talked it through and bounced it off various people to come to this decision. But it's going to be a great build up to the race, let alone the race. And everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
Like literally everyone is talking about going into the race. You've got a driver that's been replaced after 2 races by, a winning machine of a team, replaced by a Japanese driver going to his home race. It's like, lovely script.
No pressure, Yuki.
He seems pretty cool with it.
Yeah, he does.
He must be feeling that pressure because the media spotlight in Japan for a Japanese driver has always been so huge, and that'll be amplified this weekend. It'll be all about him, and he's not the front runner of this, but he'll be the story.
Right, let's have a look at our predictions then, which were all right, I would say.
Respectable.
So before each race, we predict our podium. We get a point for each of the drivers who are in the top 3. So there's 3 points up for grabs there. If we get the order exactly right, then we get 6 points. We're not only competing against each other, we're also competing against a third competitor, which is the listeners, the viewers. You can submit your predictions by checking out our Instagram stories, search at the Inside Track _podcast. Each week, we'll just pick one prediction to represent the audience. And last week, Amy Rose Lee submitted hers. Thank you very much, Amy. And Amy's prediction was first Verstappen. No. Oh, second Piastri. Yeah, good. Third Norris. So that's 2 points for Amy in the audience.
She's a Red Bull fan, isn't she? She'd be swayed by her love of the team, surely.
That's me putting Hamilton in last time.
Not a sensible call.
And then I went Norris, Piastri, Max. So 2 points for me. You very similar. Piastri, Norris, Max. So actually that is a slightly better prediction, but you still get the same amount of points, which is fair? 2. It just is.
There's got to be a countback system at the end of the season.
I don't make the... Actually, no, I do make the rules, and we're keeping them. AI represented the audience last week because we hadn't started, but we're going to carry on this experiment and keep the AI going through the season. So it's now, it's a 4-horse race. Me, you, the audience, the AI. AI's prediction, Lando, Piastri, Russell. So they're actually very close. So 3 points and close to the 6. Well, after 2 rounds of predictions, the audience has 4 points. I've got 3. You've got 3. The AI has 5. Be quite annoying if we get beaten by the AI.
If we're both equal last at the end of this, it's not very respectable.
I would personally love to get on the podium and you not to.
It's my ambition too.
Remind me where you were for the race.
So I swapped sunny Melbourne for less sunny Milton Keynes. Doesn't sound glamorous, but I was inside.
What time did you arrive?
5 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, that's not
It's
bad.
a lion for you on your average
on the 3:45. But yeah, because I think you'd said you were going to arrive at 7. I was like, you got to get in earlier than that.
So there was the option to arrive from 3:45.
Don't take that.
I couldn't do any interview till 5:30, so I thought 5 would be a respectable arrival time. It was pretty dark and empty car park. I wasn't totally convinced people were there, but
funny prank.
Yeah,
You're just not gonna, they're all in.
What
they're all in China.
I did stand outside the door knocking. There's a guy at reception doing nothing. Like literally, he can see me, I think. And he's doing nothing. I'm like, oh no, why are there only 2 cars in the car park? So you have these moments of like checking date of the Chinese Grand Prix. Yes, that's correct. Message. Sure enough, the person who was meeting just arrived a couple of minutes later. But there was a brief moment, and you look a bit weird just walking around a car park in Milton Keynes at 5 in the morning.
And he knows you don't work there because he'll know all the people who work there because he's like, I'm just ignoring this weirdo.
It felt like that started badly, but it was a fascinating insight into that race.
I just want to give you the chance to brag a bit about your access inside Red Bull Racing HQ.
Yeah, it was really extraordinary. I didn't know what to expect. I'd seen their operations room before when I'd been on a previous they'd taken me around on a tour of the whole site. But to see it all in action was incredible. It was about so they say some races there are a lot more people, maybe the ones where I've got up quite so early. But there were about 20 engineers in that room. They've got this sort of giant screen in front of you, and on that they've got all the times. There's the Sky TV stuff. There's all the sort of information from the track. But what I also enjoyed is there's live in-cockpit footage from only 8 cars. So from the 2 Ferraris, from their own 2, so basically the Mercedes and the McLaren. So the top teams, so they can keep an eye. And there's so many different facets that were interesting from that. You had some person who was asked specifically, can you keep an eye on Leclerc's front wing? So they wanted to know what was happening with that, in case it was dangerous and they could report it. And other teams would be doing exactly the same. I loved that insight. And another point towards the end of the race, can you keep an eye on Norris's tyre? Because I don't know if you remember, but his tyre went towards the end and actually he could almost not stop on that final corner. Had there been another lap, he wouldn't probably have been able to make it round. So I loved all that. Now I had a headset on, and my kind of host, I guess, was Will Courtney, who's the head of race strategy at Red Bull.
Good host.
And so, he's brilliant. So we sat down for an interview at 5:30 in the morning, which is definitely quite an early interview for me. But he was full of beans. He's been getting up for Australia, so he's used to the time. So, and then sat and had breakfast with him. And what I loved about that, I was thinking, you don't need to be doing some Formula One stuff. We've got less than an hour to the race. Incredibly relaxed, calm persona, which is exactly the role you want from him. So you could hear him. So I had the big headphones on, and I can hear Verstappen talking. I can hear Lawson talking. They're race engineers. In an odd way, it was quite a Red Bull centric watching experience. So you didn't know the full picture of the race in some ways. So it's quite hard to follow that because you were following that aspect. So it was so different to watching the race back at home.
Let's talk about the race itself then. Ferrari feels like one of the bigger stories because there was the absolute elation of Hamilton winning the sprint pole and then the sprint.
Yeah.
And you thought, here we go. And then it just didn't happen on race day. And it made me think, I don't really understand why that happens with sprint races, why it's quite often not a good indicator of how the actual Grand Prix is going to go.
Well, the car could be set up differently because you've got much less laps, and also your tyre wear will be entirely different at how that breaks down. Also, he was on pole, so he got clear, so he was clear. So
hold pole,
that made it easier. But I was surprised how big a difference it was from there to the race. Even before their disqualifications, they got a great start to get past Verstappen, but after that, Hamilton was struggling, and Leclerc's not totally happy with that car either. And it's head scratching to see what's going on, and the calamity of both of them being disqualified for different things that feel, I would think, fairly elementary.
But this is it. So underweight on Charles Leclerc's
which doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you were to take that, if you work out, I think it was a kilo underweight. someone better with maths than I did equated that to basically a couple of seconds over the course of the race, which can make quite a difference.
Yeah.
It can make a difference between winning or not. It can make a difference between podium or not.
And also they all they know the rules.
Yes.
It's not like you're not springing it on them.
It sort of plays to that Ferrari narrative. There was always they're always a bit calamitous. Aside from that dominant generation with Schumacher, there was that calamity, and it seems to have come in again. And I don't know why. There was issues in Australia, the issues in this race when it looked so good. I was excited for the race to see how they would do.
Yeah.
The more cars you have vying for the wins, the more interesting it is as a viewer.
A lot of people have been talking about this. Ferrari's new merchandise, don't know if you've seen it, but I think they should probably consider a redesign.
Yeah, another mistake by the team. I don't know how best to describe it. How would you put this into words?
Well, I guess you would say it looks... the cap looks like it's been splattered with paint.
Yes. Sprayed with champagne.
Yeah, maybe, but it doesn't. That's not the first thing it draws to mind, unfortunately. So I think they could probably have a little.
There's a lot to ponder at that team.
There really
I'm
is.
looking at the picture
And actually,
now.
that is amazingly the least of their worries. Haas had a good day.
Yeah. I did not see that coming.
What? No, I mean, because disastrous in Australia.
Yeah.
I mean, they will be over the moon, I think.
Yeah, 2 top 8s. I mean, that I don't think anyone would have predicted. Would they have predicted that? I don't think so.
Probably.
Their pace looked good, and some of the overtaking moves by like Ollie Behrman and stuff were really impressive.
Well, Ollie Behrman saying ciao
I love that.
is just...
I think that was passing Lawson as well. It's just to rub salt into the wound.
The last thing he needed.
Horrible weekend.
Did he just say unbelievable? So at the end of the race in Red Bull HQ, Max finishing 4th, Liam finishing 12th in the end. What was the mood like?
Not bad, actually. I think they run and crunch so many numbers. They know the reality. Like, it was interesting chatting to Will both before and after race for what he thought would be a good result. And it's not easy to answer because you don't know how the tyres are going to behave, how the cars are going to behave on the mediums, the hards, different stints, whether you get caught up in things. But I think they would have taken a 4th place for Max at the start. That's where they qualified and that's where they finished. I think they would have, and bearing in mind how far Liam finished back, 12th, on paper was sort of respectable. I think it's less about that result and more a concern probably about going forward.
Yeah.
Now, that wasn't, chatting to Will as head of strategy, that's not his role to be concerned and across. He was in the here and now, the strategy of the race. So his take is on how his job went, how the race unfolded. And I think they'd be pretty happy with that. I don't think they would have got they wouldn't have got to the McLarens, and I don't think they would have got better than Russell. So it's sort of as well as they could do. But they're not a team that wants to be finishing 4th in a Grand Prix.
No.
So everyone was returning. Will was telling me everyone was going to return, and there was going to be debriefs from Monday, Tuesday, depending on everyone gets back from China, and a lot of chatting. I think both GP, the engineer for Max Verstappen, and also Christian Horner said over the race radio I was listening in, a lot of lessons to learn. That's not like a well done. I mean, he did a good job. There's a lot of lessons learning for how to take this car forward, how to make it quicker, how to make it easier to drive.
There's so much to think about, and there's so much that they can't anticipate and they can't predict. Or I guess they can run various simulations, but they don't actually know how it's all going to play out until they start seeing it happen.
They have a clear idea, but it was interesting chatting to him how we're going to do a 2-stop, but it's not inconceivable. It'll be a 1, but also it could be a 3 because it's a new track surface being relayed, so everything's possible. What I said to him, the other thing I was talking to him about, and I was interested that I was like, that seemed like an easy race for strategy. Is that true? And he said, well, actually, no, it's not. It might look like an easy race, but there's so many permutations. You don't know what's happening with that hard tyre. Like, that hard tyre might break down. We might have to stop again. Someone might crash into the barrier. So it's a constant. Even till the last lap, they were still so interested with what was happening with Norris. They didn't really know until they crossed the line. So if you're sitting at the sofa watching at home, it seemed like an easy strategy race. Pretty much everyone did 1 stop. For most things, but actually he said it's anything but. It's a constant, moving game of chess, I guess, at high speed.
Norris's brakes were knackered. That was the sort of the long and short of it.
Oh, sorry, yes, I said it was his tyres, but yes, his brakes basically, if you see the speed with which So they say, obviously he reports back on his race radio to his race engineer that his brakes, I'm struggling with my brakes here. Everyone else gets excited, keep an eye on this, because if you don't have brakes, you're not going to do too well in the corner. Yeah. So sure enough, he comes into, I can't remember how much time he lost in that last corner, but it was a lot of time. Russell closed up. Had there been another straight, who knows, I imagine that would have failed, or he wouldn't have been able to, he'd have to ease off so much before the end, and they lose a massive amount of time. So that was quite an exciting, this 1-2 that seemed guaranteed wasn't guaranteed until they went over the line.
How much time does Will, as head of race strategy, spend on each driver? Is it roughly an equal division, or is he mainly focused on Max?
That's an interesting one. He was talking quite constantly about both drivers and both strategies, because even if someone's further back, you can use that driver to test out something else if you're out of the points and out of contention. So that was constantly moving. It was interesting. There was when they were talking about tiny details about front flaps on the car, how they adjusted on both, and they weren't sure how many rotations they'd done. And it sounds a really nerdy detail, whether someone they kept on playing back this footage in the room of whether they'd turn this little gun enough clicks. And it was just fascinating.
I wouldn't want to be the guy who'd done that, by the way, because it'd be like, how many times you turn it? Just go, ooh.
Well, you see on the video, the person does it, and then their body language is like, like totally, and then there's like a sort of sympathetic. But anyway, what turns out,
I think it was 3.
But it was fascinating is that what turned out is they did make a mistake. Actually, it didn't seem to affect the pace of the car, which then throws back to the model and the idea of what they thought would be all right. And so that was quite interesting that it didn't react in the way that they thought.
It was some live experimentation.
Yes, so an accidental experiment that had sort of made the car behave better. But
so actually then go and thank the guy who was doing the thank you. Yeah.
I'm not sure that will be the message. We'll see.
Count the turns. This is exciting. We've had an email. Oh. That is an option to
Breaking news.
Yeah, if you want to email, 2 big bits of breaking news. Liam Lawson has lost his seat. We've had an email. And you can email us if you want to, theinsidetrack@bbc.com. And this is from Leanne, and you'll like this. And he says, "Hi Rick and Matt, great first episode, really enjoyed it. Thank you. I particularly like learning about Australian expressions. Now, I'm glad you like that bit. I'm slightly disappointed that you've picked the only bit where we weren't talking about Formula 1. But
something for everyone. Yeah.
He goes on to say, as the next race is in my home country, China, I want to share some Chinese expressions that you might enjoy. So I'll read out the expressions and then you will have a guess again.
Oh, gosh.
Playing the lute to a cow. I think this is gettable. Ish. Playing the lute
because you've got the answer in front of you.
To a cow. That's right, yeah. Do you think a cow would enjoy you playing the lute?
It seems unlikely. Or maybe they find it calming.
Yeah, I think the cow would be bemused.
Yeah.
The cow wouldn't know what was going on. Yeah. So the meaning of the expression is speaking to someone who doesn't understand or appreciate what you're saying.
Okay. Yeah, I probably should have got that.
Yeah. Okay, what about, it's hard to get off a tiger once you're riding it. I mean, that just works literally, I think. But metaphorically.
Hard to get off a tiger if you're once you're riding it.
Yeah.
Like something that's just out of control.
Yeah, so Leanne says being in a situation where it's difficult to back out of, like being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Or hitting the barriers at the Grand Prix, for example.
Yes, exactly. And then yeah. And the last one, you won't get this. Horse, tiger, tiger. One more time.
Quite a lot of horses.
Horse, tiger. Yeah. Well, quite a lot of horses, quite a lot of tigers. Horse, tiger, tiger.
So.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
There we go.
So or mediocre.
I got the hardest one.
I think it was the delivery. I think I was saying it.
Maybe you
horse, tiger, tiger.
Yeah.
Leanne says, keep up the good work. Well, we will endeavour to do so. Based on what I've just told you, who had a horse, tiger, tiger race?
Probably the RBs, because they qualified very well and then both ended up ending outside of the points, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like it was, I think the expectation was high and then it was all a bit horse, tiger, tiger.
I think they might have been a bit worse than mediocre.
Yeah. It's hard to call anyone else mediocre because where were they? 11th?
Yeah.
14th? I can't think now.
You could sort of say that Haas finished in mediocre positions, but be absolutely
it'd be harsh to call.
It'd be really harsh. Maybe no one was horse, tiger, tiger.
RBs, I think, are the closest to horse, tiger, tiger. But no one's perfect for that wonderful expression, which I'm going to use frequently now to bemuse people.
Just after we recorded last week's show, we learnt the very sad news of the passing of Eddie Jordan, iconic racing driver, Formula One team owner, broadcaster. I have such sort of clear memories of him as the boss of Jordan, having this kind of this sort of like rock and roll vibe. Like, he just seemed cool in the way that the other owners didn't, and he seemed like a real like racing nut. He was just a petrol head who ended up as a position where he ran a team, and then he gave Schumacher his debut. Like, he's just, and then actually as a broadcaster, just fantastic. Like, punchy, but so entertaining. Like, he's just one of the most entertaining figures in my sort of motorsport viewing history, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I only came across him once as a team. At that point, there was some event at the Royal Albert Hall, and he turns up, everyone's black tie, and he turns up in full Jordan bright yellow kit.
Of course he did.
With a page 3 model on either arm for some photo purpose, I can't remember. But there was such a noise as he arrived, and you could hear this noise coming from a distance, and there's lots of celebrities, everyone turns around to see, and sure enough, he is the loudest and brightest person in this room. But he's remarkable what he did, and actually it's been lovely seeing all the messages of him, of the rock star guy, but a sort of genius entrepreneur that built up this team. But people need to remember also he's got a role in the future of Formula One in an odd way, because he was also the manager of Adrian Newey.
Yeah.
And
So
one of the last bits of work he did was sort out that contract for him to go to Aston Martin. So I love the idea that the Eddie Jordan effect we'll still see next season and the season beyond. So kind of his impact lives on.
I do want to make the point that this podcast is completely a safe space, and so I'm certainly learning about Formula One, and we do want to encourage you to ask any questions. You can ask really anything, and no question is a stupid question. Producer Nick has submitted our first question. He's asked, what on earth is DRS? When people mention these 3 letters, I just nod along. I think it's something to do with overtaking. Can I have a go?
Yeah, go.
And then you correct me. So it's drag reduction system.
Bing, yep.
And it's something to, I don't quite know how it operates. Something to do with the rear wing and a flap, where if it is, and I can't remember if it's up or down, then you get more down. Then you're more aerodynamic, and so the car can go faster. And there's only certain bits of the circuit, so there's like 2 or 3 bits on circuits where you can use it, and you have to be within a second of the car in front. And the idea is you just get more overtaking.
Yeah, so it was introduced back in 2011 to try and improve overtaking. Yeah. Because cars get caught in the dirty, turbulent air behind another car, and the way that air is behaving on the car, you're losing time. So it made overtaking quite hard. And people don't want processional races, fans who are watching in the stands or back at home. So they introduced this drag reduction system. Now, not everyone loved it. I remember Juan Pablo Montoya called it, it's like giving Picasso Photoshop, which I thought was a wonderful expression.
Yeah,
but
it's like an art. Overtaking
there is sense to it, because you can't do it everywhere. China, for example, there were 2 activation zones for it, around about turn 13 and 16. And you're in a second, you press this flap, and what it does, it opens a bit of the rear wing. So rather than this sort of turbulent air can come through, so you don't have as much against the resistance. Thank you, that's the word, against the car. So you then get that pace. So it slightly falsifies the overtaking, but it does make it fun that you can get people to have these manoeuvres at these. So it's clear points where as a driver you either have to attack or you have to defend.
And I guess we just look over to producer Nick and see if that answered his question.
Horse, tiger. Yeah. I thought we did very well.
So that race in Japan, so much build up, so much excitement, so much focus, so much attention. I was already excited. I'm really, really excited about it now. I'm not going with the predictions I made a week ago, and I'm going to try and fashion mine in my head now and just give them to you. I'm going to go. It's hard, isn't it? I'm going to go Norris. Russell, Verstappen. I think Piastri makes a mistake.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't leave a McLaren out. Maybe he does make a mistake, but I have Norris also as winner, Piastri second, And I'd really ummed and ahed over 3 drivers for third, but I'm going to go for Verstappen.
Okay.
Could have been Leclerc, could have been Russell, but I'll go for Verstappen.
I've got AI's prediction here. I think it's a bit odd. Verstappen to win. Don't think so. Charles Leclerc, second. Don't think so.
Any McLarens?
Lando Norris in third.
No Piastri.
No Piastri, so...
Oh, we're going to get some points back.
I agree with the AI on that. You can follow the show on Instagram and TikTok. You can watch us on YouTube. Links are in the podcast show notes. Send in your predictions for the next race as well. Who's going to be making the podium? You can do that by checking out our Instagram stories. The Instagram account is @theinsidetrack_podcast. And a reminder, any questions, any thoughts, any feedback, our email address is theinsidetrack@bbc.com. We'll see you at the same time next week. Spend some time with the Red Bull team and talk race strategy in detail. Thanks very much for your opinions and your insights today, Matt. Horse, horse, tiger, tiger. And in the words of Oliver Behrman, a ciao. The Inside Track is funded and made by BBC Studios, a commercial company that is wholly owned by the BBC. It's produced by Nick Thompson. Video editing and social media is by Evanita Souza. James Cook is the executive producer.